So they did another ultrasound, and he said, my suspicion is that this is a diaphragmatic hernia. They started going over how horrible it was going to be, and that was my first time that a doctor in the medical profession had ever suggested to me that I have an abortion. And the one thing we told the head geneticist was, my God is big. My God can paint the sky purple with pink polka dots if he wants, so he can heal my son. When they finally delivered him, he didn't make a sound. My husband held him as he passed from this life. And the first face my son ever saw was the face of Jesus. And I remember being so mad because I fought so hard to save my son. But I'll tell you, the one question I don't have is, what if I'd had an abortion? If you don't know the Lord, please get to know him. Because if you go through hardships, having the Lord sometimes is the only thing that's gonna get you through it. My name is April Lindsay. I am a mother of 12 children. 6 of them live here on earth and 6 of them live in heaven. God is always good, he's always merciful, and he's always in control, no matter what the situation is. In 2 Samuel chapter 22, verses 31 to 33, it says, as for God, his way is perfect. The word of the Lord is proven. He is a shield to all who trust him. For who is God except the Lord? And who is a rock except our God? God is my strength and my power, and he makes my way perfect. So that's the verse that's kind of got me through my situation. So today I'm going to tell you about my son, Mitchell. We have a motto in our house that it's not about what happens to you, it's how you handle it that's important. And we learned how to handle a very rough situation in a big way. And I'm a big believer that God prepares you for your trials. Not always, sometimes you're just kind of thrown in, but God has prepared me anyway for this trial that we walked through. For one, I had a daughter that was constantly sick, and she had RSV when she was 6 weeks old, was in the hospital for 8 days, and there was a lot of fighting with the doctors of, hey, you need to listen to me, and because if you're a mom, you know your kids. You know when there's something wrong. You know when your kid isn't exactly, just quite being right there. So there was a lot of fighting, and throughout her illness with the RSV, long story short, she had hearing loss because of it, because a lot of that infection settled into her eustachian tubes. And I had some doctors tell me, well, she's just ignoring you. And I'm like, she's 3 months old, she doesn't know how to ignore yet, and so there was a lot of push that I had to do on doctors. I learned how to become an advocate for my child with my daughter, Carly. And so turns out she was almost profoundly deaf. She had 5% hearing in one ear and none in the other. And so she ended up getting tubes in, and that kind of fixed the problem, but she has some permanent loss from that, but she's fine. But it was through that's how I kind of learned how to be an advocate in the medical realm. And then I went through a very, very rough divorce where I learned how to become an advocate for the safety of my children. There was a lot of court battles, there was a lot of police, there was just the whole 9 yards, but that's another video. But so I learned several years before walking through the trial of Mitchell how to fight for my kids, how to fight for the ones who don't have a voice, for the ones who can't stand up and fight for themselves. And with that, what was helpful was I was planted in a church. I didn't get saved until after, I was 26 when I got saved, but I was planted in a church, and having a church family around you during trials, I can't express the importance of being in a church, getting involved and getting to know who's around you. Who do you sit next to? Talk to these people, get involved, because it's when you walk through something, it's not a matter of if you ever have to walk through something hard. It's when you walk through something hard. You're gonna need an army of people around you that are willing not just to go, hey, what do you need? But I'm praying for you. You want people to to truly pray on your behalf. And I had that pretty early on, and that was a good thing. I also had very firm convictions, especially with abortion. I have a hard and fast, firm conviction that no matter what the situation is, and that's probably going to ruffle some feathers, but no matter what the situation is, death is never the answer. It is never a cure for the problem, especially the death of an innocent child, one who has no voice, who can't speak from inside the womb. And so I already had that pretty strong conviction. Almost 16 years to the day. Well, we knew we were pregnant with our son. Well, we didn't know it was a boy yet, but I went in for my 20-week ultrasound, and up until this point, I had already had several miscarriages. Total, I've had 5, one of which was, when I talked about my daughter Carly, one was her twin. So we had made it to 20 weeks, and so we were like, oh, we're in the clear, nothing's wrong. So I went in by myself because my husband had a pretty substantial meeting he couldn't get out of, and so I was like, oh, I'll be fine. I can go in by myself. I'm a big girl. I've done this before, So I was just excited to find out the gender, and that was back, when you couldn't find out what you were having at 9 weeks anymore, but you had to wait till the 20-week scan to find out what you were having. And I was just excited. I had no more fear because I was like, we've passed the dangerous point for miscarriages. And so when I went in for the 20-week scan, I was just excited to see what we were having. Well, the tech was taking a long time. And if you've ever had an ultrasound and they kind of hover and they kind of stay in one place, and then they start note-taking, on their little thing. And I asked the lady, because I'd known her for a while, and I said, Julie, what's wrong? And she said, I need to get the doctor in here. And I was like, oh boy. And I'm looking at the screen trying to figure out what was wrong, and I can't read those things, so I don't know. The doctor came in, and the problem was his heart was on the right side instead of being on the left side. And then they couldn't find his stomach, and then they couldn't find his kidneys, they couldn't find his liver. And so, it was only 20 weeks along, so my doctor said, well, I think the reason we can't find these things is because maybe he's just too little yet. Maybe we have your due date wrong. But we do know that the heart's not in the right place. So at first they thought it was a condition called situs inversus, which is where things are just kind of flip-flopped, which would have been no big deal because he would have had to put a medical bracelet on for the rest of his life. And if there was ever a medical emergency, hey, the appendix is on the left side, not the right side, So I still wasn't very worried at that point. I thought, cool, what a neat little birth defect. He sent me over to University of Tennessee to their high-risk doctor, and I can't remember his name, but he's kind of the highest risk of the highest risk. And so that was a little concerning. It's like, okay, why'd you send me to this guy? And so we went in, and this was about 2 more weeks past because they needed for Mitchell to have some growth on him so they could see. Well, they did see his heart was right-sided. They couldn't see a right lung, but they thought, well, maybe it's because the heart's pushing. They did find a kidney. They did find all the organs. They just weren't where they were supposed to be. And so the doctor there thought, I have a suspicion, but let me check my books because I'm not quite sure. And that impressed me. Because this was a doctor that wasn't willing to go, well, I know everything, and this is what I think it is. He was willing to do a little bit of look into what was going on. So I had to wait another week because he still needed to grow. So they did another ultrasound, and he said, my suspicion is that this is a diaphragmatic hernia, which is where there's a hole in the diaphragm, and all those organs just get pushed into to the chest cavity. He goes, if my suspicions are correct, we can't treat you here. He said, you need to go to a specialist. We can't, if you have him here, he said, Knoxville just doesn't have the facilities to take care of this significant type of birth defect. And so he gave us the choice of Duke, Vanderbilt, or Cincinnati. And we chose Cincinnati for two reasons. One was the doctor that developed this surgery for diaphragmatic hernia on infants. Even if it's in the womb, you can do certain surgeries. He worked there. And I'm from Ohio, and so we had family close by. And so that's why we chose the University of Cincinnati. I went through several tests. I had, the first test I went through was a fetal MRI. And kind of backtrack a little bit, I've also had, the reason there were even more concern was I have a pretty good history of complications in pregnancy. I was on bed rest with a few of my kids at that point. I had a history of miscarriages. I also have a condition, I can't remember the name of it, where it's like my main artery that goes down your back. It's not where it's supposed to be. So once I get like 4 months along in my pregnancies, I cannot lay on my back because I will pass out. And my sister has the same thing. But so all of those tests had to be done on my side. So I would stay conscious throughout these things. I also had a condition called polyhydramnios with Mitchell, which is excessive amniotic fluid. And that's kind of par for the course with if you have a baby with a severe birth defect or a significant genetic anomaly. And so I had to be drained twice for that. And that isn't fun because the needle's like, 5 feet long or so. But that has to be done carefully, and it's not comfortable. We found out after the fetal MRI that their suspicions were confirmed that it was a congenital diaphragmatic hernia. Most of his abdominal organs were now in his chest cavity, and he only had one kidney, which the one kidney wasn't that big of a deal. We're like, okay, so we had to, okay, where do we go from here? And they said, because this is such a significant birth defect, because of your excessive amount of amniotic fluid, we highly suggest you get some genetic testing because we think there's probably a genetic issue going on as well. And so we came back to Knoxville and I had some genetic testing done through an amniocentesis for him, and then they did genetic testing for me as well to see, well, whatever he has, am I a carrier? And he was diagnosed with Emanuel syndrome, which, if you want to get nerdy, it's called, known as derivative 22 syndrome. And it is on the list of the rare genetic disorders. It's a partial trisomy of the chromosomes 11 and 22. So if you want to nerd out and go look at that, you can. It's an unbalanced translocation of the 11th and the 22nd chromosome. I am a carrier of this, which means I do have a trisomy, but mine is balanced. With the 11th and the 22nd chromosome, mine is balanced. That's why I have no issues. And so we went back to Cincinnati, and we also learned about Emanuel syndrome, where it's one of those things where you're thinking, the more we learned about it, it's like, why couldn't this have just been Down syndrome? Because Down syndrome is easy in comparison. We were told he was going to be nonverbal. We were told he was going to be deaf. We were told we were going to have to care for him like you would an infant for the rest of his life. And at that time, he was the 200th diagnosed case in the world. So they didn't know a whole lot. And at the time, there really wasn't, and this is 2008. And so that at the time, they really didn't have a whole lot on the internet either about what this condition is, because like I said, he was number 200 worldwide. And so they handed us a printout. The head geneticist handed us a printout of what this stuff was. And I'm like, I looked at my husband, I said, this is the printout. This is the same webpage I looked at last night, which told me they don't know. They don't know a whole lot. So they're telling me, they're giving me all this gloom and doom, and they're telling me, this probably explains why you've had all those miscarriages, but I hate to be the bearer of bad news. I don't think you're ever going to be able to have kids. I'm going, now wait a minute. I have 3 kids at home that I've given birth to. And, he said, well, you and your husband won't be able to. And I said, yeah, but we have one together. So it was just kind of, they started going over how horrible it was going to be. And that was my first time that a doctor in the medical profession had ever suggested to me that I have an abortion. And he said, we still have time. That was the one phrase I heard over and over again, was there's still time. And at this point in the game, when he was diagnosed with Emanuel syndrome, I was about 28 weeks. So they're telling me I have time. That was the first suggested time that they said I should have an abortion, because he's not going to live a long and happy life. You're going to have a rough time. And I thought, you don't know who you're talking to. I can handle this. This is okay. And the one thing we told the head geneticist was, my God is big. And my God can paint the sky purple with pink polka dots if he wants, so he can heal my son. I'm not going to be the one to say, I'm not going to be willing to call the shots. This is in God's hands. And I truly believed at that time, my husband and I, we had such a firm belief that God was going to heal him. After all of the tests, we had 2 fetal echocardiograms because they wanted to check his heart since it wasn't in the right place. So the doctors I had a fetal cardiologist, I had a fetal pulmonologist, because this lung was not developed, the right lung, because everything was kind of squishing. He had 2/3 of his liver, and like I said, almost all of his abdominal organs were in his chest cavity. I had the cardiologist, I had the pulmonologist, I had my doctor that was, a general practitioner that I had to see up there at Cincinnati. I had an obstetrician up there. We had the NICU staff, and we had just a patient advocate type of person. And they suggested then that because of my history of preterm labor, because of the fact that I had such excessive amniotic fluid, that they didn't want me far from the University of Cincinnati. They wanted me to stay within a 2-mile radius. So our only feasible option was the Ronald McDonald House. And so we stayed at the Ronald McDonald House right beside the University of Cincinnati, because there's Children's Hospital right there too. So we stayed up there for quite a while, several weeks, and I had to take, my mother-in-law went up with me because I was on bed rest with the Ronald McDonald House. Stipulation was I couldn't be by myself, so I had to have her with me. And my mom stayed back here in Knoxville because I had other children that needed to get to school and that needed to be taken care of. And my husband's job was not one that he could just stop, so he had to continue working. He had to provide for the family. And so just being away was rough. And going to all of these doctor's appointments was rough because I was by myself. There were so many questions. And each appointment got worse and worse. It was just every appointment I was hit with, and another thing. So we were finding out all these things. Oh, by the way, his one kidney he does have, we don't know if it's working quite right. At least his heart was great, And so, in every appointment, I was reminded, you still have time to make a decision. You still have time. And like I said, yes, I have this massive conviction on abortion, and it's a hard and fast rule. But I do understand how a woman could be pressured into, be talked into having one. I was pressured heavily. I can't even begin to explain how many doctors tried to explain to me why it was beneficial. Almost every appointment. But I'm hard-headed, ask my parents. And so I think it takes someone who's going to put their heels in the ground and go, no, I'm not doing this, absolutely not. And every appointment, it was a push. So I really do understand if you aren't grounded in your faith, if you aren't in constant communication with the Lord, and if you don't have an army around you praying for you, I really get, because you get isolated, and that's a lot of times when that can happen. And so I firmly believe that it was just the prayers of my fellow brothers and sisters. It was the prayers of my family. It was the strength of God more so than anything. and my stubbornness that I didn't cave. And never once, it never once even entered my mind that that would be an issue. Not once, even after everything kept getting worse and worse and worse. And then I had a round table meeting. I was at 37 weeks along. It was like something out of the movies. It was, I had all the team in there, the pulmonologist, the cardiologist, my general practitioner, the OB, the advocate that was in there. I had a lot of other people in there. And, we're looking up at this big screen of his latest MRI image, and I'm looking at him and hearing these doctors tell me there's still time. There's still time. And so I stood up, and my poor mother-in-law, she's so meek and quiet and just so good. And she saw such an ugly side of me that day. But I stood up and I slammed my fist on the table and demanded a new team. Oh, the other thing, I also didn't have insurance. Blue Cross Blue Shield had kicked me off of their plan due to multiple miscarriages at the time. And so here I was, with my team. I at least, without insurance, I was at least able to kind of call the shots a little bit. I could say, no, I don't want this test. Yes, I want this test. I refuse this. I refuse, So I had a little bit of control in the situation. But we were also staring down $1 million medical bill without insurance. And I've got my team, and I can't speak for these people, but I just wonder if some of their biggest push was, we got this lady in here that's going to cost us a lot of money. She's never going to be able to pay this bill. I don't know. That's just speculation on my part. But I stood up and I said, I want in 5 minutes, I want HR in here right now, or I'm going home. I said, because I don't trust you guys to save my son. HR came in and they reassured me. And I said, I don't know how many times I have to say this. I have it written down. I am not going to kill my son. Well, they didn't like those words. They did not like those words. And they said, well, that's not what we're asking you to do. And I said, then what are you asking me to do? Spit it out. What are you asking me to do? And they said, well, there's still options. You can end the pregnancy. I said, you could deliver him today and help him. I said, no, absolutely not. And I said, and if I don't have it in writing, and in front of this HR team, that you guys aren't going to help protect and try to save my son, I'm going to walk home today. And my poor mother-in-law, she was, trying to calm me down. And for my sake, she said, I don't want your blood pressure getting high. I don't, we gotta, so she was a good person that was so calming to me. So she kind of helped calm me down a little bit. Well, they agreed okay, we won't bring it up again. And they never did. But I was at 37 weeks when they brought that up. And it was shocking. This is 2009. And I was 37 weeks. And the doctors at the University of Cincinnati were suggesting I end this pregnancy that late. So kind of to quell any rumors that they don't ask you to do that. They sure do. It had gotten so difficult up there, and I saw such an ugly side of the medical community. However, I saw a good side of the medical community. My OB down here in Knoxville called me every week to check on me. How you doing? He didn't have to do that, but he was calling me from his private number and to check on me. What are they doing? Because he was, how's it going? And knowing full well he's getting all this information faxed back to him, but he wanted to know how I was doing. And so he was in constant communication with me. The doctor that I saw at UT was so kind and so willing to even admit that I don't know what's going on, so let's just look into it. So there is a good side of the medical community. There are good guys. I don't want to just hound on all medical people bad. They aren't. So I don't want that to come across that way. It's just my situation and my doctors in Cincinnati. That's what I had to deal with. At this point, I was away from my kids. I was away from my home. This had been weeks now, at the Ronald McDonald House. And while it's a great place, the Ronald McDonald House you are still surrounded by very, very sick kids. It is not, in my opinion, it wasn't a happy place because of the nature of you'll see kids and then all of a sudden they aren't there anymore. And the reason they aren't there anymore is not because they went home, they passed away, they went to heaven. These are little kids. Seeing that, knowing my issue with Mitchell, not knowing if he's going to survive or not. And it was almost every day because they said, we don't know if he's going to survive. He could die at any minute, so there was just daily this constant, is he going to live through the day? And if he didn't kick for more than, 20 minutes, I was super nervous. And he was an active little thing. I mean, we always joke that he had so much fluid that he was just having a great old time. He was a very, very active baby. He had his nap routines, and so that was always reassuring to me. But I missed my kids. I missed my family. I felt very alone. I mean, my mother-in-law was with me, but she can't replace my kids. I had little kids. Max was 2, and Cameron he was young. I think he was probably, I don't know, just 12. And then the girls in between, I missed my kids. And I remember they had come up for a visit and they left. That day is so difficult to remember, to tell you about. I sobbed when they drove off. And I remember sitting later that night, just praying, God, just make him whole or take him home. And as a mother, that's such a difficult prayer to pray. And I felt guilty about that for a long time. That was so hard. But God answered those prayers. He answered both of those prayers because he did make him whole, and he is whole. That next day, I had just a typical routine appointment with the obstetrician, and every appointment I had to be set up. I had to be hooked up to a monitor with the straps and so I had to be hooked up to that for 20 minutes every time I went in, and I had appointments 3 times a week. So at this appointment, the following morning, they noticed an irregularity in his heartbeat. And so they said, we're going to go ahead and admit you. We will probably try to deliver. And at this point, I'm 38 weeks. And so I'm frantically trying to get a hold of my husband, and he worked at a place where he couldn't have his phone with him. And so I was just frantically trying to get a hold of somebody. Hey, somebody needs to get a hold of John. He needs to know, because there was so much unknown. They finally got a hold of him. He was able to get up to Cincinnati it was about 7 hours later. He drove through a tornado getting up there. There was this horrible storm that came through. But I'm admitted to the hospital, and they said, well, we're going to go ahead and start to induce. And so, I'm a little nervous because my husband's not there yet, and they're hooking me up, and it was just kind of scary. And then he shows up, and I'm glad he was there before they gave me an epidural. They said, yes, we're going to try to induce. We're going to, let's get this ball rolling while his heart rate, because it would be fine, and then it'd get a little irregular, and then it would be fine. So then they gave me an epidural, and I had a horrible reaction to the epidural. almost killed me. It dropped my blood pressure is what it did. And my lowest blood pressure reading was 37/17. So that was my lowest reading. During this time, I was in and out of consciousness. I had 4 IVs. I had 2 IVs in this arm, 2 in this arm, and 4 nurses just pumping, just trying to keep my blood going. And I remember thinking that my arms were going to just explode. That was painful. And all this time I'm on my side, which makes it even more uncomfortable. I remember at that time, because I knew I was dying. You just know. And I've had nurses tell me, we know when patients are dying because they usually know. And when a patient's adamant about it, that's how we're like, oh boy. Well, this whole time I'm talking to Jesus. And I wasn't scared during this whole time. I knew I was dying. I knew what was happening. But I was talking to Jesus. I was going over logistics, going, hey, Jesus, now look, John can't do this on his own. He can't raise a baby on his own. He can't do this. Look, he's got to get to work. And I was going through all the things. Okay, well, who's going to get the kids to school? Who's going to get up? Because he doesn't get up always on time. And, I'm saying all these things to Jesus because I knew he was right there. I knew he was in the room with me. The Bible says to be absent from the bodies, be present with the Lord. And there was an unmistakable presence with me in that room. There was such a peace. God was with me. Jesus was right there. I don't know how to explain it, but I was never once fearful. And I remember after going through all the logistics with God, like he doesn't know how to, how to take care of things. I remember getting excited. I remember going, I'm going to see Jesus today. I'm going to see heaven. I started getting that excited. And then all of a sudden, that went away and I was, started to get real sick and because I was coming in and out of consciousness and my blood pressure finally got regulated. And I remember the room was so bright. And I asked someone later about that, one of the nurses, I said, well, whoever pulled that huge light out of the ceiling? And she goes, that only happens in the OR, that big light that comes down. I went, oh. So I was like, oh, I was truly dying. But that was not a scary part for me. Believe it or not, after all the stuff that I went through with Mitchell, that was not even remotely scary. So if that's any comfort and consolation, is that death isn't, when I was faced with it, I was not afraid. And because God was with me, Jesus was right there. There's no mistaking. Once my blood pressure got regulated and got stable, I remember just laying there on my side and I remember watching Mitchell's heart rate and it was going lower and lower and lower. And then all of a sudden it was utter chaos. Teams of doctors rushed into the room, grabbed my bed and started shoving me out. Now at this point, I have no idea what all kind of medicine they gave me. I'm sure it was a ton of epinephrine, but I started to not kind of be with it. And there's a lot of bits and pieces from this point on that I don't remember. I don't know if it's just my brain because it was such a traumatic experience kind of blocking that out or the obscene amount of medicine I was on all of a sudden. But my husband said that I was very combative with doctors to the point they threatened to tie my hands down. I don't remember being that way, but I do remember grabbing a hold of the door frame. I was on my side, so trying to grab a hold of the door frame because I didn't want to leave the room because I was afraid of what was happening. No one was telling me anything. And so they rushed me into the OR. They finally told me what was happening. And they said, we've got to get this baby out. We've got to get this baby out. The problem was I wasn't numb. So the epidural, all it did was give me this horribly low blood pressure. I'm on my side and I'm not completely numb either. So I was terrified going, you're going to cut into me and I'm going to feel this. I had two anesthesiologists in there with me. One was the main one that was really watching me because she knew what was happening. I had another doctor in there with me, and he had a mask right here by my face. And he said, if you feel even the slightest pinch, you let me know and we'll put that mask right over and you'll be out. So that was a little bit of comfort to me, knowing, okay, I'm not going to have to endure surgery and feel it. They never did. It was uncomfortable, but it was such a fast surgery. And at the time, we had said we were going to have my tubes tied while I was in surgery, because we thought if I have to have a C-section, we'll just go ahead and tie my tubes while we're there. And I remember in the OR, when they're doing the C-section, Jesus was with me there again too. He's always with us. He doesn't leave us. I want to make that very clear. He's not going to walk away. He doesn't leave you. But all of a sudden, his presence was so strong in that room again. And I knew it. But I knew he wasn't there for me. When they finally delivered him, he didn't make a sound. They whisked him out. My husband was in there the whole time. I don't remember him being there. I just remember that one anesthesiologist and the one doctor that was talking to me and Jesus. And so they said, okay, well, while he's in there, while they're working on him, do you want us to go ahead and tie your tubes? And I said, no, just get me out of here. Because I didn't know how much time I would have with him. In the meantime, they finished stuff. They sewed me up and pushed me to recovery. And it felt like eternity. And in my medically induced head, because things just weren't making sense either, I thought I was alone in this dark room with just one nurse, and it's not how it was. But in the meantime, Mitchell was getting worked on, and my husband was in there, and he said the NICU nurses were just kind of standing there. They didn't know what to do, and the doctors tried to intubate him once, and it didn't work. And evidently with an infant, you got one shot to do that, and it didn't work. And so the doctor looked at my husband and said, what do I do? What do you want me to do? And John said, imagine he's your son. So that doctor worked and worked and worked. And he said, there's nothing I can do. There's nothing. And he handed Mitchell to my husband. My husband held him as he passed from this life into heaven. And the first face my son ever saw was the face of Jesus. And that's comforting to me. And I'm glad my husband got to hold him while he was alive. And he had those moments with him. Mitchell lived for 45 minutes after birth. And my husband was there with him that whole 45 minutes. So he was with his daddy. And from his daddy's arms, he went to his father's arms. I was in the recovery room, and John came in by himself with a big smile on his face. And I knew immediately, because of the smile he had. I looked at him and I said, he didn't make it, did he? And he said, no, honey. And just the gut punch that happens with that. I guess the only way you would know is if you've ever lost a child. But it's a true physical pain in your chest, in your stomach. The Bible says in Philippians 4:7, and the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and mind through Christ Jesus. My husband and I had an incredible amount of peace in those moments and in those hours and in those next few days afterwards. I can't explain it. Like God says, it's a peace that passes all understanding. I didn't understand. I almost felt guilty. Why do I have this peace? Why I should be, now I was mourning. I was hurt. And another thing, that in those next few hours, a pastor that I had that was in my home church where I grew up in, came to the hospital room. And that was comforting to see a familiar face, a man that was once your pastor, because he lived not that far from the hospital. And so he came and he prayed over us, and that was a good thing. I had lots of family come down during those next few days. I was in the hospital for quite a while because they could not get my pain under control, because the C-section was such an emergency it was such an emergency surgery that I don't have your typical 4-inch incision. They cut me from hip to hip. And so, and I was on my side. So that didn't, in fact, my doctor here was really irritated by the quote, shoddy job they did. So it took weeks for me to walk on my own because the pain was so bad. So I remember asking, I've got to be, discharged from here. I said, I got to bury my son. So I've got to go home. But in those days there at the hospital, and we went back to the Ronald McDonald House once I was discharged for the night, there was a lot of laughter. And I'm sure people thought we were crazy. I'm sure this poor woman, she's just lost her son, and she's just laughing. I bet she's on some drugs, and so, but I was on some pain meds, but there was a lot of laughter between my husband and I. And the only reason that I know that we had that laughter, because God gave us tremendous peace, and God is in the midst of our marriage. And so we have that. And we knew where Mitchell was. Yes, his body was in the morgue, but even then that didn't, and I did get to hold him, which I almost didn't do. But my husband said, you will regret this if you don't. So I'm glad I did. But in the moment, it was kind of weird. And I know it might be weird for you to hear that, but because I knew he wasn't there. I knew where he was. Even at the funeral, some people were saying, I'm sorry about your loss. And my husband would go, he's not lost. I know where he's at. My husband. But there was just a lot of that. And I know we confused a lot of the medical personnel, and because there was peace, there was laughter, with all of that. But then, after the funeral, which was our church did such a good job with his funeral. In the days after that, it's when I got angry. I was really mad because I remember thinking, but why? I wasn't doing anything wrong. I wasn't smoking. I wasn't drinking. I wasn't, drinking excessive amounts of caffeine. I was watching what I was eating. But God, we followed you. And that's kind of a cop-out because, abortion never even crossed my mind. So following God that way was pretty easy because I already had my convictions on what it was. And doing the right thing shouldn't be hard. It can be, but this one wasn't. And I remember being so mad because I fought so hard to save my son. And I couldn't do it. No matter what I did, I could not save my son. John was telling me, look, maybe God is using us as an example of what not to do, or what not to do, or how Christians handle, adversity, and how Christians can handle really hard things. And I remember kind of yelling at him, but I don't want to be the example, and so that was hard. I got mad at, and this is in the days and weeks and months following too, I got mad at people posting pictures of their babies on social media. I got mad at any pregnant woman I'd see at the grocery store. And then I got furious at the women that were pro-choice. I got furious at those posts on social media. I don't even think furious is a strong enough word. Here I fought so hard. And I couldn't save my son, and these women are out there doing it on purpose. And again, I don't want to speak those words in condemnation. I don't, because I do know personally some women that have gone through that, who have had an abortion, and I don't hate them. They struggle. They struggle with it, even though they know they've been forgiven. But my stance is stronger than ever on that. You know, you have a lot of the what if questions, the what if game. Just don't start that game because it doesn't have an ending. You know, what if I had done this? What if I had done that? And there's no ending to that game. But I'll tell you, the one question I don't have is, what if I'd had an abortion? That's at least one question I never have to worry about, because I did do everything in my power and the result was still the same, because God's in control and God knows. You know, and I may not know until the other side of eternity why we had to walk through what we went through. I don't know. I've tried to rationalize it. There was a lady once that, this couple that heard our story, and she was set to have an abortion, and she thought, well, if the Lindsays can walk through this, we can too. And she canceled her abortion appointment, had her baby, and they were told he was a trisomy 18 baby, which is why they were going to have an abortion, because the doctor said this is a death sentence. And turns out sweet little Elijah only had Down syndrome. So geneticists can be wrong. Genetic tests can be wrong. Ultrasounds can be misleading. The one thing I want to encourage is, if you go in for a test and you find out, oh no, this is what's happening, get a second opinion or wait. In fact, just pray. But don't abort, because you never know. It could turn out like sweet little Elijah and only be Down syndrome. And he's the sweetest little boy. But that was one good thing, I guess, that came out of it was, Elijah's here, my friend's son. And, and it's, again, I don't know why we had to walk through it. And that was a kind of a burdening thing that I had to ask my husband. Well, why? And he said, well, what makes us so special? What makes us immune to having to deal with this sin-cursed world? What makes us so special? And it reminded me of the verse in Romans 8:26, where it says, likewise, the Spirit also helps in our weaknesses. For we do not know what we should pray for as we ought, but the Spirit himself makes intercession with us with groanings which cannot be uttered. And I'm telling you, in those days following, the weeks following, the months following, the years following, there are times where it's just groaning. It's a lot of groaning. It's a lot of, but why? I don't understand, Lord. I don't understand. And God knows my heart. And there are so many times when I pray, and I still prayed, even though I was mad. But I told him, God knows me. And you can tell him that too. He knows I was mad. But I didn't walk away from him. I didn't sin against him. But I told him how angry I was, because I didn't get it. I didn't understand. Even with the good that did come out of that story, and with, little Elijah being born, there was still a lot of groaning prayers. There was still a lot of anger. There was just a lot of just not understanding. And again, even today, and he would have been 17 this coming February. There's still lots of groaning. The one thing I do know is how does one go through something like this without God? How do you do that? I don't understand, because it was such a painful experience. And there were days, I'll be very transparent with you. There were days that I woke up and cursed the sun because it rose. There were days that I just didn't want to go on. But I had my kids. And sometimes that would frustrate me, but I loved my kids so much, and it was just hard. I don't know how I would have been able to go through that without the Lord. He literally held me up for days at a time. If I didn't have him, you would have had to bury me next to my son. That's how excruciating that pain was. And unless you've lost a child, you may not know that. And I'd hope that anybody watching this ever has to walk through that. But the reason I bring that up is to just the goodness of God, the goodness of how much he loves me. Look, April, I know you hurt, but I'm here. And so many times, I just would have to crawl in his lap and just cry. And it's those groanings that only the Holy Spirit can hear. 2 Samuel 12:23, David says, "Can I bring him back again? I shall go to him, but he shall not return to me." And that's a big reminder of, I know where he's at. That's the comfort I have. We don't grieve, like in 1 Thessalonians 4:13, we don't grieve as those who don't have hope. So in that immense grief, there's so much hope. There really is that hope of knowing that either by rapture or by my death, I'm going to see my son again. And I'll know him exactly who he is, and he'll know me, even though he never saw me. He'll know me. Years later, 3 years later, I found out that I was pregnant again. And let me tell you how terrifying that was. Not only knowing, oh boy, here's the, can we make it past the scary miscarriage phase? And we did. So then we went into our 20-week scan. And that was terrifying. That was very scary. So here we were, and the doctor never came in for the ultrasound usually, but he did this time. We probably looked like crazy people. We were sitting there going, 2 kidneys. Yes, the heart's where it's supposed to be. And we were cheering because everything was where it was supposed to be. We were ecstatic. I mean, literally cheering. My doctor was jumping up and down. I mean, he was so excited. And, I got, wiped up my belly, got cleaned up, and she sat up, and then Julie goes, "Hey, you want to know what you're having?" I was like, "Oh yeah." Because usually, because that was the furthest from our mind. We didn't care what we were having. So found out we were having a girl. But it was a very scary pregnancy because of what we had just walked through. One, because I knew, I can't have an epidural. Oh no, and the thought of doing a C-section, I'd have to be under. And so long story short, I had her natural, no pain meds. So that was an experience, but it was good. And her name is Molly. And I have called her my heart healer and my mind healer. She's not a replacement for Mitchell in any sense of the word. I don't look at her with favoritism. You know, I don't like her better than my other kids or anything like that. But I 100% believe God just gave me her to heal a lot of the brokenness that I had. Molly not only healed my heart, she did, God used her, but she healed a lot of that pain in our family, So that was Molly. And, she's also proof that genetic experts aren't always right. They're human. And God is good. And what I want you to know in conclusion is that God is good all the time, even when it doesn't make sense, even when it's hard. He's merciful, he's gracious, and he's good. I do want to show you a picture of my son. This is Mitchell. He's a cute little thing, isn't he? So that's him. So I will see him again one day. Be encouraged, though, that when you have to walk through something, and as a Christian, if you are a believer, it's not a matter of when, or it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. Prayerfully, you won't walk through something this difficult. But know that God is there with you every step of the way. He is good always. Even when things are so hard, and as angry as I got, as angry as I was, because I didn't have him, I didn't have my Mitchell. Even throughout that, God knows. I don't know why God took my baby boy home, but he's in the best place he could ever be. He is whole, and he's home. So if you don't know the Lord, please get to know him. Find someone that you know that's a Christian that you can talk to, because if you go through hardships, having the Lord sometimes is the only thing that's going to get you through it, because he got me through it. One of the things that's pretty amazing about this whole story is, I didn't have insurance. And so here we were facing down $1 million medical bill, because we were looking at a possible year's worth in the NICU, and all of the problems that come from it, not having insurance. We didn't qualify for any government assistance or anything because we were above the poverty level. And so that was a little scary. But so here we were when it was all said and done, our bill was originally close to $95,000 with the hospital, with the different doctors, specialties. And to make a very long story short, we ended up only having to pay just a hair over $9,000 is what we ended up having to pay. Partly because we kind of stalled them a little bit, and it's legally, that's a legal avenue. You can kind of say, hey, we want itemized bills. And my sister-in-law was the one that kind of suggested that, just stall them. It's a legal stall. It's not, I'm not giving you bad advice here, but it was, I want this. And eventually they all wrote off a ton of our bill because they're not for profit. So it's a tax write-off for them. And so God was good in that department, in the financial department, because, it was overwhelming. I mean, if you had $1 million medical bill, it doesn't matter if you were a millionaire. If you were bringing in $1 million a year, that would be impossible still to pay. And so we were also looking at possibly relocating, John's job really couldn't relocate. And so there was just a lot of what ifs up in the air financially. So when it was all said and done, we only paid had to pay a fraction of what, was originally due. And so God was good in that.